Hello, I'm Gretchen Pettis. I'm the principal entomologist for BioSafe Systems and am delighted to talk to you today about IPM for fall ornamentals. I'm excited partly because, well, I love fall, and partly because IPM and ornamental production and landscapes is one of my favorite topics. Here's a picture of me from years ago scouting in a nursery in Georgia. And if you don't get anything else out of this presentation today, scouting, which is the systematic observing and recording of pest signs and symptoms, is one of the most underperformed and underrated IPM strategies that could transform your pest management program from reactive to proactive. As the principal entomologist for BioSafe, I also am in charge of new product development for insecticides. And this has really given me a unique opportunity to more deeply examine the topic of so-called biorational pesticides. And before I dive into some of the pests that can plague your fall ornamentals, I'd like to take a few minutes to discuss what biorationals are and the place in which they fit into the IPM framework. So as you know, pesticides vary in their toxicity to people and to non-target organisms, and in their potential ecological impact. Biorational compounds achieve several currently desired goals of pest managers and the greater public. They're very selective. They usually target just the pest. They typically don't persist in the environment, and they're much safer to handle and apply when compared to most chemical pesticides. And they tend to preserve beneficial organisms, either due to mode of action or to some other factor. Biorational products are generally short-lived in the environment because they're broken down rapidly in the presence of light and air. They can be broad spectrum or narrow spectrum in terms of their pest targets. Another important factor is that biorational pesticides are much less likely to lead to pesticide resistance and can really be a vital element of your pesticide resistance management. Though control can be on par with synthetic chemistries, it's important to know that biorational compounds are going to require greater thought and more carefully timed implementation for maximum effectiveness. Now, there is some overlap between organic and biorational. Many biorationals are organic, but not all biorational products have to be. Traditionally, pest managers have viewed daily pest management situations through the eyes of control or eradication. In an ideal situation, the best strategy would be to identify and remove only the pest and cause minimal disruption to the system. That's where this concept of integrated pest management comes in. Now, this graphic looks a little bit confusing, and though it was developed for agricultural production, it does a pretty nice job, I think, of showing a continuum of IPM practices. The primary concepts I'll describe can be adapted for greenhouses or nursery production practices. So let's take a few minutes to look at the practices along the scale of proactive to reactive and biointensive to conventional. Now, my goal is always to help growers move to the proactive and biointensive parts of the chart. So here you can see a proactive and biointensive approach would be making sure that the beneficial habitat of your plants is optimal for their growth, having healthy soil or soil media or mix in your containers. Crop genetic diversity and cultivars can be very important. We know some cultivars are more resistant than others. And, we typically think of monitoring and ID of pests or scouting essentially as a very proactive kind of thing to do. And indeed, it's even done in conventional regular IPM. But as we move to the biointensive side, we're talking about monitoring IDs of pests, but also beneficial so that we can make wise choices. We're utilizing mechanical and physical controls, applying biologicals in conventional and biointensive. And we typically think of conventional IPM as during that monitoring, applying a chemical control and expecting your result. Now, so where do biorationals fit into this whole scheme, and how does the chart relate to ornamental production? So I'm going to add one more category to this diagram. The addition of biorational products plus arthropod natural enemies such as predatory mites or wasps, parasitic wasps, it's important to keep in mind that conservation or augmentative biological control, greenhouse climate management, product formulation, delivery, and endophytic microorganisms can increase the various ways in which microbials can interact with arthropod natural enemies, and these interactions can be both positive and negative for pest control. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. The protected environment of high value greenhouse crops is particularly suited for the effective functioning of commercially produced natural enemies. And globally, the majority of arthropod natural species are sold for use in augmentation and greenhouse crops, though it can certainly be used in nurseries as well. So just to reiterate, biorational products are generally selective. They typically don't persist in the environment. They're generally safer to handle and apply, and they typically offer shorter pre-harvest and re-entry intervals, and generally preserve more of the beneficial species. Some of the more commonly used and effective biorational pesticides for insect and mite management are insect growth regulators. And there's also mite growth regulators as well, including a naturally derived product called azadirachtin, which you've probably heard of. Bacillus thuringiensis, Courtsachi, is another very effective product. The myco-insecticide Bovaria bassiana. I also am a huge proponent of horticultural oils, insecticidal soaps, and entomon pathogenic nematodes. And these are nematodes that attack pest insects. Depending on where you're located, the late weeks of September and early weeks of October are transition periods for warm season and cool season spider mite species. So I'm going to go over now some of the main species that we tend to see in fall that can cause us a lot of headaches. So as I mentioned, we're transitioning, and the two-spotted spider mite we typically think of as a warm season mite. But at this time of year, you may actually see two-spotted spider mites start to turn kind of this red color. And you need to be careful because they can look very similar to Persimilis, which is a predatory mite. And if you were to look a little bit closer, you'd be able to differentiate that. So some cool season mites that are not, such as not the two-spotted spider mite, would be something like the spruce spider mite or the southern red mite that you see damage from here in these images. In the top one, you can see fall damage from a spruce spider mite causing that bronzing color. The new light green color foliage is what was produced during the summer and is likely to be attacked in the fall. And on the bottom, you can also see spring damage on this Andromeda, which will then start having more issues in the fall on that new growth. Another pest of importance in the fall, especially if you grow woody ornamentals, are several scale species, and two in particular are the tulip tree scale and the magnolia scale. These, we typically think of scale species as being a spring issue, and we know that the crawler stage is the most important stage for management. Well, tulip tree scale and magnolia scale, which affect yellow poplar and many magnolia species, are a certain type of scales that produce their crawlers in the late summer and early fall. And they produce prodigious amounts of honeydew. So if you start seeing honeydew on some of these woody ornamentals that are attacked by these two scale species, now would be a great time to get out there with either an azadirachtin or horticultural oil for management. So another pest that we tend to not really think of as much in the fall as the days start getting a little bit cooler are aphids. And they certainly have a explosive reproductive capacity. So do keep your eyes on aphids. They don't disappear, particularly if we have a warm September. They can continue to reproduce and grow. And the final pest that I'll talk about are caterpillars. fall is the season for caterpillars, and there are multiple different types that can be an issue on our popular fall ornamentals. Um, Here we have an armyworm, which I've heard this year armyworm populations are very high, and these are polyphagous, meaning they feed on many different types of plants. And they can be important pests of such fall crops as ornamental cabbage and kale, pansies, poinsettia, and on the bottom you can see a salt marsh caterpillar. That's another one that we often see becoming an issue in the fall. So now I'm going to take you through a sample management program for caterpillars to illustrate the combining of a biorational product with beneficial insects, just as an example for you. So as the air gets cooler and days are getting shorter, nurseries and greenhouses are busy producing plants such as hardy chrysanthemum, ornamental cabbages and kale, pansies, and caterpillars can become a pest in greenhouses as well as outdoor production. In fact, plants in greenhouses can suffer more damage due to lack of natural enemies that can keep caterpillar populations in check. And as you all know, caterpillars are just the larval stage of moths and butterflies, known as the Lepidoptera. There are a number of caterpillars that can cause damage on fall ornamentals. And here I'm just going to show you a few of them with some images: corn earworm, beet armyworm, cabbage looper, salt marsh caterpillars, European corn borer, European pepper moth, and omnivorous leaf roller. And the two most common and damaging that we typically see in greenhouses and outdoor production, especially on mums, are highlighted here: corn earworm and beet armyworm. Most of these species do feed on multiple plant species and families, but some caterpillars do preferentially feed on crops in a certain plant family. For example, the imported cabbage worm and diamondback moth and cabbage looper primarily feed on plants in the crucifer family, making coleslaw out of your ornamental cabbage and kale. Some, like the pansy worm, are only going to be found on pansies. Excuse me. Learning how to identify the caterpillars you have can be important for management. Now, caterpillars can damage all parts of the plant, and numbers can build up quickly because they blend in very well with the plant foliage, and that early damage is typically not very noticeable. They can damage the buds, flowers, foliage, and stem. Here we can see corn earworm feeding on chrysanthemum flowers. Some salt marsh caterpillars damage to chrysanthemum, and that early damage, they just kind of strip off the green part of the leaf, leaving those veins. So it really looks almost like a disease when you first look at it. Here you can see some girdling damage caused uh, by the European pepper moth. And this can, with that girdling damage, it can cause damage to an entire branch. So if you walk by your chrysanthemum and you see an entire branch dead, it could be something like European corn borer or another caterpillar that's girdled the branch. So here you can see some European corn borer damage where the whole stem of that plant has been killed as a result of the boring and chewing activity. The other thing that we typically don't think about is that chewing damage causes wounds that can allow diseases to enter. So if you do have caterpillars, it is good to be mindful of that and include fungicidal management tools into your toolbox. Okay, so now I'm going to give you the secret formula for pest management. Are you ready? Prevention is the best known method of controlling insects and disease. Okay, so maybe this isn't such a big secret, but it's definitely a major factor in successful and cost-effective pest management, and it's supported by abundant field observations by myself and others, as well as research. So how do we do this for caterpillars? Say, for example, in greenhouses in this example. There's a saying in the industry regarding plants: start clean, stay clean. This is true for lepidopteran pests as well as for diseases and other pests. And most pest Lepidoptera are night-flying moths. As you know, if you've probably left a porch light on at night, they're attracted to lights. So there are several different things that you can do for prevention. First, inspect your incoming nursery stock, making sure that you're not bringing problems into your greenhouse. This is a great preventative measure. It's well worth your time and effort to do that so you can catch those things, those pests very early in the cycle. In greenhouses, adults of the moths or butterflies tend to enter through vents, sidewalls, and doors. As we get hot days, we tend to open up the vents. So putting up screening at this time of year where you can prevent those from coming in and where airflow may not be as much of an issue as in the summer can be a great preventive tactic. You want to minimize the nighttime lighting in and around your growing area if at all possible. As I said, moths are attracted to light, so just turning off outside lighting can be one way to reduce the populations around your greenhouse. It's inexpensive and it's an easy thing to do. Now, weed management may not seem like an obvious choice, but as I mentioned, many of these caterpillars feed on multiple different species and families of plants. So managing the weeds around your greenhouse can help reduce the populations. And finally, sanitation, making sure that you don't leave a lot of dead plant material around that can serve as a refuge or a source of food for the caterpillars that get into your greenhouse. So the next step then is scouting and monitoring. Now there's several ways that you can do this. There are trapping for adults. You can use light traps. I generally don't prefer this unless you want to become a moth expert. Many are very hard to differentiate, and a light trap is going to bring in all types of moths. That could be kind of hard to determine whether they're a pest species or just there, just hanging out accidentally. What I prefer are pheromone traps. And if you look online, you can find specific pheromone traps for targeting specific caterpillars. So for example, here you see a sticky trap that has this little, it's called a septa. It's a little plastic lure that has a sex pheromone that attracts a certain species. And in this case, this is for the European pepper moth, which is an invasive species that's becoming more and more important in the greenhouse, and it only brings in species of that moth. So you can target what your target pest is, what your concerns are, and know that that's what you're getting without having to sort through a lot of dead moths trying to figure out what they are. Sticky traps can also be a good kind of tool to allow you to see when moths might be coming in. So you can put them by windows, vents, doors to potentially even catch some of them before they can lay eggs on your plants, but I wouldn't rely on them as a control measure. They're more, again, just letting you know that they're there and to be aware that you need to start preparing your management. The next thing you want to do is look for larval damage. So if you don't catch the adult moths, you'll want to look for disease symptoms such as skeletonizing, branch flagging. You might also see signs like chewing damage, window painting, leaf folding or rolling. Sometimes caterpillars will roll up a leaf in order to get inside of it to protect itself. And one of the best things to look for is frass. This is the pelletized excrement of caterpillars. And typically, you'll see these small pellets underneath where the caterpillars are feeding. And most of the time, it's what I notice first before I notice the caterpillars because they blend in so well with the plants. So now let's talk about a bio-intensive management option for caterpillars. You've noticed when your moths come in, you know that they come in, they lay eggs on your plants, those eggs hatch, and the caterpillars start feeding. Well, there's several options. And one program that I really like and can be extremely effective is the combining of trichogramma wasps with Bacillus thuringiensis kerstaki. And the trichogramma is a minute little wasp that lays its eggs in caterpillar eggs. So you can imagine it's very tiny. And right below the picture of this cute little wasp, you can see a little card where they typically ship trichogramma as pupa inside the host egg. And you distribute these into the field just prior to emergence of the adult wasps. These little cards can hang on the plants, and it usually ends up coming out to about $20 an acre, which is very reasonable. And these wasps will fly around. They're like little heat-seeking missiles for caterpillar eggs and can find them where you're not likely to see them because caterpillar eggs are so small and blend in so well. Then you can come in for anything that the trichogramma wasp has missed. You can use Bacillus thuringiensis, BT. Bacillus thuringiensis kerstaki, found in BT Now by BioSafe Systems, contains this bacterium that, when consumed by caterpillars, ceases their feeding within minutes and kills them within 2 to 3 days. So you can rapidly stop the feeding. And it's also known as one of the safest pesticides available in terms of beneficial insects. It is the one least likely to cause disruption in your biocontrol program. So this is what a program might look like. And here's the typical life cycle of a butterfly or moth. So you have the prevention. When your plants come in, you're checking them, you're putting screening on your vents, you're reducing your weeds. You start scouting with your pheromone traps or your sticky traps. And as you notice the moth population start to increase, then you release the trichogramma wasps. So, of course, those moths come in. They begin laying caterpillars fairly soon after they enter the greenhouse. The trichogramma will target those eggs. After a period of about 7 days or so, then you can come in now with your BT Now or your BTK product. And you really want to target those early caterpillars. If you wait till the end, those last 2 larval stages of caterpillars do something like 95% of all of the damage that they're going to do in their life cycle. So catching them early is good for 2 reasons. One, they're not going to have a chance of doing as much damage. But then 2, they're much more susceptible to those BTK bacteria. So when you apply something like BT Now or another BTK product, good timing is important. As I mentioned, young caterpillars are much more susceptible. You want to get good coverage. This product has to be eaten by the caterpillar in order to be effective. So getting good coverage on the top, bottom, and stems of your plants can be a very important factor for good success. You want to apply it when you're not anticipating rain for at least 6 hours. Obviously, in a greenhouse, that's not as much of an issue, but if you do overhead watering, at least allow them at least 6 hours without doing overhead watering. So in the evening might be an optimal time in which to do that. So a reminder with BT Now, this is not a knockdown product. However, it does cause rapid cessation of feeding in Lepidoptera. And it has a narrow pest spectrum. It only affects Lepidopteran larvae. So if you have sawflies or some other pest, it's not going to be effective. And this is not a reactive management strategy. If you have a very large caterpillar outbreak, you may need to knock it back before you come in and continue with a biocontrol or biorational type option. So fall is really a great time to review and revise your IPM plan while you're drinking your pumpkin latte or whatever you love in the fall, your hot chocolate. That would be a great time to review what you've done in the past year and revise it for the coming year based on the pest pressures that you had. If you don't have a plan, fall is also a great time to make one. You can contact me at BioSafe Systems. I can help you put together management plans for specific pests. Your local extension service is a great option. And you could even use a chart, something like this, where you put down what your crop is, say chrysanthemum. Your pest might be salt marsh caterpillar. You mention your control strategies that you've done previously. You think about your future IPM strategy. So maybe you didn't get on top of it this past year. So this year you're going to maybe get some sticky traps, or you're going to start monitoring for those moths in your greenhouse. You create this year's plan and you can set a calendar alert. So I am someone who uses my calendar alerts on my phone all the time. Just give yourself a heads up. This is the time of year to start looking for caterpillars, and set a little alert for yourself. And make any notes that would be important for you or your your employees. So IPM can really be thought of as like a toolbox, and the most important tool in the toolbox is the practitioner's knowledge that's gained through continued experience, sometimes painful, as well as education, like watching videos like this. So evaluating the success or failure of an attempt at pest management can really be an invaluable tool for the future to save you money and allow you to switch over to more biorational options that are going to be safer for your employees as well as safer for the environment. And just like there's all levels of being healthy, there's all levels of IPM adoption. You don't have to use all organic or all synthetic chemistries. You can be organic-ish. You know, if a grower or a landscaper tries to stay as eco-friendly as possible in their growing practices, you're doing some good. And some good adds up and is infinitely better than no good. So just because for business survival reasons, an individual has to use a little chemical technology to get through a low moment of localized high pest pressure, it doesn't turn you into some sort of a demon. This is especially true if the chemical used is as soft as possible given the circumstances, if the applicator uses it responsibly, and it's used when, how, and where exactly it needs to be used. So I kind of stole this levels of IPM adoption from Pitney Bowes, and I thought it was a really good way of illustrating how people tend to approach IPM. A lot of time people have been doing things the same way for a long time, but they want to dip their toe in. Either a product such as a neonic is being phased out and they want to try something new or have to try something new. You know, this is what I would consider a non-adopter, somebody that's just kind of looking into, they're dipping their toe in there. Then we have the beginner. This is usually the scariest phase for people. This is where you are trying something new for the first time. And generally, if you're switching over to more biorational options, I really do recommend that you just try one product at a time or one pest at a time as you start working your way. That way, there's not so much on the line, and you can always go in and clean up if you have to. You know, pest management advisors can be an invaluable handholder during this time, but hang in there. That roller coaster will soon get better. And number three, my practitioners, this is my favorite phase. This is when I see growers, they've tried something new on a pest, a particular pest that they've had, that they've either had issues controlling previously, or they're just wanting to step into it. They're seeing some success and they're feeling more confident. This is when you can start adding on more biorational options. And hopefully, we know you might get to the expert or master stage where you just look at the pests and they simply fall over or avoid your landscape or nursery. Probably not likely, but you know, we're really just moving from that reactive pest management mindset of using synthetic, broad spectrum, long residual pesticides, not considering plant health or calendar-based sprays, to more of a key plants, key pests, key beneficials identified and noted, to optimizing your plant health, proactively scouting at the right time, and using biorational or organic products for your pest management. So this is a spectrum, and you can continue to improve as you go along. So, you know, BioSafe Systems is a family-owned company. We have 5 manufacturing facilities throughout the country. All of our products are made in the US, and so we've been able to avoid a lot of the kind of shipping and manufacturing issues that some manufacturers have experienced, as well as having dedicated lines so you can ensure that the products are not going to have any kind of contaminants in them. We have a large portfolio of products, and I'm glad to talk to anybody at any time. And I hope you enjoy your journey as you start moving towards biorational pest management. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to answering any questions that you might have.